The dust from Harrison Langford's boots settled on the porch steps as he pushed open the door to his ranch house, exhausted from 3 weeks of driving cattle north to Prescott, and froze at the sight of a woman sitting in his grandmother's rocking chair by the window, a needle moving steadily through the fabric of his worn work shirt. She looked up with startling green eyes, her dark auburn hair pulled back in a simple braid, and said without apology, "You needed help, I needed purpose." Harrison stood there in the doorway of his Gila City, Arizona home, the September heat of 1883 still clinging to his clothes, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The woman appeared to be in her early 20s, dressed in a faded calico dress that had seen better days, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she worked on the tear in his shirt sleeve. "Who are you?" he finally managed, setting down his saddlebags with a heavy thud. "Genevieve Turner," she replied, biting off a thread with her teeth. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, mentioned you were a bachelor living alone out here, struggling to keep up with the ranch work and the household both. I have been staying at the boarding house in town for the past month, and I needed work. She thought we might help each other." Harrison removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair, still trying to process this unexpected development. He was 26 years old, had been running this ranch alone since his father died 2 years ago, and the truth was everything had been falling apart slowly but surely. Shirts went unmended, meals were whatever he could throw together quickly, and the house had taken on the neglected air of a place where someone merely survived rather than lived. "Mrs. Patterson had no right to send you out here without asking me first," he said, though his tone lacked real anger. He was too tired for anger, and besides, the pile of mended shirts folded neatly on the table beside her told a story of their own. Those were shirts he had been meaning to fix for months. Genevieve set down her sewing and stood, smoothing her dress. "She did not send me. I asked her if she knew anyone who might need help with housekeeping or cooking. She told me about you, and I rode out here 3 days ago. When I found the place empty but clearly lived in, I let myself in. I figured if you came back and wanted me gone, I would leave. But if you came back and found your home in better order, you might see the sense in keeping me on." "That is breaking and entering," Harrison said, but he was looking past her now at the kitchen, where he could see the floors had been scrubbed, the dishes washed and stacked, the windows cleaned until they gleamed in the afternoon sun. "It is survival," Genevieve corrected quietly. "I have been in Gila City for 4 weeks with my money running out and no prospects. I am good with my hands. I can cook, clean, mend, and manage a household. I grew up on a ranch in Texas before my father lost everything to drought and debt. After my parents died last year, I have been moving from town to town looking for honest work. I'm not asking for charity, Mr. Langford. I am offering a fair trade. I keep your house, cook your meals, mend your clothes, and you provide me with room and board and a small wage." Harrison walked further into the house, noticing details now. The floor was indeed clean, cleaner than it had been in months. The smell of fresh bread came from the kitchen, and when he looked, there were 3 loaves cooling on the counter. His mending was done. The windows sparkled. Even the books on the shelf had been dusted and straightened. He turned back to her, studying her face more carefully now. She was pretty in an understated way, with a smattering of freckles across her nose and a determined set to her jaw that spoke of someone who had learned to fight for what she needed. There was no coyness in her expression, no flirtation. This was business. "It is not proper, you know," he said finally. "A single woman living in a house with a single man. People will talk. People always talk," Genevieve replied. "I stopped caring what people said when I was 17 and my father had to sell our ranch, and we moved into a two-room shack on the edge of town. Propriety is a luxury for people who can afford it. Harrison found himself almost smiling at that. She had steel in her, this Genevieve Turner. He could respect that, and God knew he needed the help. The last 3 weeks had been brutal, and he had come home dreading the pile of neglected chores waiting for him. Instead, he found much of it already done. "All right," he said slowly. "We will try it for a month. I can pay you $20 and provide room and board. You can have the small bedroom upstairs, the one that was my sister's before she married and moved to California. We keep things proper and respectful. You do your work, I do mine. If at the end of the month it is not working for either of us, we part ways with no hard feelings." For the first time, Genevieve smiled, and it transformed her face entirely, bringing warmth to those green eyes. "That is more than fair. Thank you, Mr. Langford." "Harrison," he corrected. "If you are going to be living under my roof, we can dispense with the formalities." "Then you must call me Genevieve," she replied. "Or Jenny, which is what my parents called me." That first evening was awkward in the way of strangers learning to navigate shared space. Genevieve cooked supper while Harrison tended to his horse and checked on the livestock. When he came back inside, washed up and changed into a clean shirt, he found the table set with real care, plates and utensils arranged properly, a jar of wildflowers in the center. The meal itself was simple but good. Beef stew with vegetables and fresh bread, better than anything he had eaten in months. They ate mostly in silence, the scrape of spoons against bowls the only sound. Harrison found himself stealing glances at her, wondering about her story. What had driven a woman alone to take such a risk, moving into a stranger's house uninvited? What kind of desperation or courage did that take? "Tell me about the ranch," Genevieve said finally, breaking the silence. "What do you raise here?" "Cattle mostly," Harrison replied, grateful for the neutral topic. "Some horses. I have about 200 head of cattle now, down from 300 last year. Lost some to disease, sold others when I needed the money. It has been a hard couple of years since my father passed. He was the one who really knew how to run things. I am still learning." "You do not have any hands working for you?" she asked. "Had two, but I had to let them go 6 months ago when money got tight. Been managing alone since then, hiring day workers when I need extra help during roundup or branding. It is not ideal, but it is what I can afford." Genevieve nodded, understanding in her eyes. "My father used to say that ranching was the art of trying to make something grow in a place determined to kill it." "Your father was a wise man," Harrison said. "Is that why you know how to manage a household so well, growing up on a ranch?" "My mother taught me everything about keeping a home," Genevieve said, her voice growing softer. "She believed a woman should be able to stand on her own 2 feet, should know how to cook, sew, manage money, even shoot if necessary. When my father's fortunes changed, those skills became the difference between surviving and not." "I am sorry about your parents," Harrison said quietly. "Thank you," Genevieve replied. "It has been a year now. Some days it feels like a lifetime, others like it was yesterday. But I am still here, still moving forward. That is what they would have wanted." Over the next few weeks, a rhythm developed between them. Harrison would rise before dawn to tend to the animals and work on ranch repairs, riding out to check on the cattle or mend fences. Genevieve would have breakfast ready when he came in, then spend her days cleaning, cooking, tending the small vegetable garden she had discovered behind the house and begun to revive, and managing all the household tasks that had been slowly drowning Harrison before her arrival. They were polite with each other, respectful, maintaining proper distance. But gradually, inevitably, they began to talk more. Over breakfast, Harrison would tell her about the state of the ranch, what needed doing, what problems he was facing. She would listen intently, sometimes offering observations from her own childhood that proved surprisingly useful. Over dinner, she would share stories about her day, the small victories of getting stubborn stains out of shirts or successfully baking bread in his temperamental oven, and he found himself laughing more than he had in years. One evening in early October, Harrison came home to find Genevieve on a ladder, trying to repair a shutter that had come loose during a windstorm the night before. "What are you doing?" he called out, alarmed. "Get down from there before you fall." "The shutter was banging all day," Genevieve said, not looking down as she worked a screw into place. "It was driving me mad. I can fix it myself." "That is not your job," Harrison said, positioning himself at the base of the ladder in case she fell. "I would have taken care of it." "You have enough to do without worrying about house repairs too," she replied. "I grew up climbing ladders and fixing things. I am perfectly capable." She was right, of course. Within minutes she had the shutter secured and was climbing down, wiping her hands on her apron with satisfaction. But as she reached the last rung, her foot slipped, and suddenly she was falling backward. Harrison caught her instinctively, his arms wrapping around her waist to steady her, and for a moment they stood there frozen, her back against his chest, both of them acutely aware of how close they were. Genevieve stepped away quickly, color rising in her cheeks. "Thank you," she said, not meeting his eyes. "I suppose I should be more careful." "I suppose you should," Harrison agreed, his own heart beating faster than it should. "But I appreciate you fixing it." That night, lying in his bed, Harrison found himself unable to sleep. He kept thinking about the moment when he had caught Genevieve, the way she had felt in his arms, warm and solid and real. He had been alone for so long, focused entirely on survival and keeping the ranch going, that he had not allowed himself to think about companionship or anything beyond the next day's work. But now, with Genevieve in the house, everything felt different. The place felt like a home again rather than just a shelter. There was laughter and conversation and someone to share meals with. He found himself looking forward to coming home in the evenings, wondering what she had cooked, eager to tell her about his day. It was dangerous territory, he knew. She was an employee, someone depending on him for her livelihood. He had no right to develop feelings that might complicate their arrangement. And yet, he could not seem to help it. Genevieve, in her room upstairs, was wrestling with similar thoughts. She had told herself when she moved into Harrison's house that this was strictly business, a practical arrangement that would allow her to save money and figure out her next steps. She had promised herself she would not get attached, would not start imagining impossible futures. But Harrison made it difficult. He was kind and hardworking, treating her with respect and genuine appreciation for what she did. He listened when she talked, laughed at her jokes, and there was a gentleness to him that belied his rough exterior. She had caught herself watching him when he did not notice, admiring the way he moved, the strength in his hands, the rare smile that lit up his face. It was foolish, she told herself. She barely knew him. This was just an arrangement, nothing more, and yet her heart seemed to have other ideas. The turning point came on a cool November morning. Harrison had ridden out early to check on a section of fence he knew needed repair, planning to be gone most of the day. But around mid-morning, his horse stumbled in a prairie dog hole, and Harrison was thrown hard, his shoulder slamming into the ground with a sickening crack. He managed to get back on his horse and make it home, but by the time he reached the house, his face was gray with pain and his left arm hung useless at his side. Genevieve looked up from her bread dough as he stumbled through the door and immediately rushed to his side. "What happened?" she demanded, helping him to a chair. "Horse threw me," Harrison managed through gritted teeth. Shoulder. Think it might be dislocated. Genevieve's face went pale, but her hands were steady as she carefully helped him out of his jacket and shirt. The shoulder was indeed dislocated, the joint sitting wrong, already swelling. She had seen this injury before, had helped the ranch doctor treat it on their hands back in Texas. "I need to get the doctor from town," she said. "No time," Harrison gasped. "It needs to be set now before the swelling gets worse." "Can you do it?" Genevieve met his eyes, saw the trust there despite the pain. She swallowed hard. "I have seen it done. I assisted our doctor once when one of our hands had the same injury. But Harrison, I am not trained. I could hurt you worse." "You will not," he said with certainty. "I trust you, Jenny." It was the first time he had used the nickname, and something about it steadied her. She nodded, moving quickly to gather what she needed: strips of cloth to bind his arm afterward, whiskey for the pain, and to clean her hands. She made Harrison drink a good portion of the whiskey first, then positioned herself carefully. "This is going to hurt," she warned. "Just do it," he replied. She did, using the technique she remembered, pulling and rotating the arm in one smooth motion. Harrison let out a strangled cry, and then there was a pop as the joint slid back into place. He sagged forward, breathing hard, sweat beading on his forehead. Genevieve caught him, holding him steady, and for a moment they stayed like that, her arms around him, his head resting against her shoulder. "You did it," he whispered finally. "Thank you." "Let me bind this properly," she said softly, reluctantly pulling away. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline fading, but she forced them steady as she fashioned a sling to immobilize his arm. For the next 3 weeks, Harrison was forced to slow down, unable to do his normal ranch work with only one good arm. It drove him half mad with frustration, but it also meant he spent more time around the house, watching Genevieve work, talking with her for hours at a time. She took over many of his lighter chores without being asked: feeding the chickens, milking the cow, tending to the horses. She proved more capable than he had imagined, handling tasks that would have daunted many women. One afternoon, he found her in the barn, struggling to move a heavy bale of hay. "Let me help," he said automatically, reaching with his good arm. "You will do no such thing," Genevieve said firmly. "That shoulder needs time to heal properly. I can manage this." "You are stubborn," Harrison observed, but he was smiling. "I learned from the best," she replied, grunting as she finally wrestled the bale into position. She turned to find him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "What?" "I was just thinking how grateful I am that you broke into my house," he said honestly. "I do not know what I would have done these past weeks without you. Probably would have tried to work through the injury and made it worse." Genevieve wiped her hands on her skirt, suddenly unable to meet his eyes. "You have given me more than you know," she said quietly. "A place to stay, work that matters, a home. I have been drifting for so long, feeling like I did not belong anywhere, but here I feel useful. I feel like I matter." Harrison stepped closer, his good hand reaching out to gently tilt her chin up so she was looking at him. "You do matter, Jenny, more than you know." The air between them felt charged, electric. Genevieve's breath caught as she saw something in his eyes that made her heart race. He was going to kiss her, she realized, and she wanted him to. But before either of them could move, a voice called out from the yard, "Hello, anyone home?" They stepped apart quickly, the moment broken. Harrison walked out to find one of his neighbors, Tom Wright, dismounting from his horse. "Tom," Harrison greeted him, hoping his frustration was not obvious. "What brings you out here?" "Heard you got thrown from your horse," Tom said, eyeing the sling. "Wanted to check on you, see if you needed any help with the ranch work." "That is kind of you," Harrison replied. "I am managing, though, got some help." Tom's eyes shifted to where Genevieve had emerged from the barn, and his expression grew knowing. "So I heard. Word around town is you have got a housekeeper now. Young, pretty thing living out here with you all alone. People are talking, Harrison." Harrison's jaw tightened. "People should mind their own business." "Maybe so," Tom said. "But you know how it is. Might want to think about making things proper if you take my meaning, for the lady's reputation if nothing else." After Tom left, Harrison found Genevieve inside, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I am sorry," she said immediately. "I did not mean to cause trouble for you. Maybe I should leave, find work in town instead." "No," Harrison said firmly. "You are not leaving. Tom Wright is a gossip and a busybody, but he is not wrong about one thing. Your reputation could be damaged by this arrangement. I should have thought of that from the beginning." "I told you, I do not care what people think," Genevieve said, but her voice lacked conviction. "But I care," Harrison replied. "Not because I am ashamed of having you here, but because you deserve better than to have your name dragged through the mud by small-minded people." They stood in tense silence for a moment. Then Harrison took a breath and said, "There is a solution. Not one I am suggesting lightly, but one that would solve multiple problems." Genevieve looked at him warily. "What solution?" "We could get married," Harrison said simply. "Make this arrangement legal and proper. You would have security, a real home, protection for your reputation. And I would have help with the ranch and the house, a partner to share the load with." Genevieve stared at him, shocked. "That is a business proposal, not a marriage proposal." "I know," Harrison said. "I am doing this badly. The truth is, Jenny, over these past 2 months, you have become important to me, more important than I probably have the right to say. I look forward to seeing you every morning. I miss you when I am out working all day. You make this house feel like a home again. I am not saying this is a conventional romance, but I think we work well together. I think we could build something good here if you were willing." Genevieve's heart was pounding. This was not how she had imagined a marriage proposal, practical and straightforward rather than romantic. But there was something honest about it too, something real. Harrison was not making false promises or declaring undying love. He was offering partnership, respect, and genuine affection. In 1883 Arizona, that was more than many women got. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course," Harrison agreed. "Take all the time you need." Genevieve spent the next few days in turmoil. She cared for Harrison, she could not deny that. He was a good man, hardworking and kind. She felt safe with him, valued. And the thought of leaving now, of going back to wandering from town to town looking for work, filled her with a dread she had not expected. This place had become home faster than she had thought possible, but marriage was a serious commitment. Once made, it could not be easily undone. Was she ready for that? Did she want that? The answer came unexpectedly one evening when Harrison was teaching her to shoot. He had insisted she should know how to handle a gun, living this far from town. They were behind the house, Harrison showing her how to hold the rifle properly, his good arm guiding her stance. When she finally hit the target, a bottle set up on a fence post, she turned to him with a triumphant grin, and the look on his face took her breath away. He was looking at her with such warmth, such pride, such affection that it made her chest ache. "I am falling in love with you," she blurted out before she could stop herself. Harrison went very still. "What did you say?" Genevieve set down the rifle, her hands trembling. "I said I am falling in love with you. I did not mean to. I told myself this was just practical, just business. But somewhere along the way it became more. You became more. And I realized that I do not want to marry you just for security or propriety. I want to marry you because I cannot imagine being anywhere else, with anyone else." Harrison closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his good arm wrapping around her waist as he pulled her close. "Thank God," he breathed. I have been half in love with you since the day I came home and found you mending my shirts. I just did not know how to say it, did not know if you could ever feel the same way about me." "I do," Genevieve whispered. "I really do." When Harrison kissed her, it was nothing like the practical proposal he had made days before. This was fire and passion and promise, his lips claiming hers with a hunger that made her knees weak. She kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands tangling in his hair, all the weeks of restraint and careful distance burning away in an instant. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Jenny. Not because it is practical or proper, but because I love you, because I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes," Genevieve said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Gila City. Mrs. Patterson stood as Genevieve's witness, beaming with satisfaction at the match she had inadvertently helped create. Tom Wright was there too, looking slightly sheepish but offering genuine congratulations. Genevieve wore a dress she had made herself from fabric Harrison had insisted on buying her in town, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Harrison wore his best suit, the one he usually reserved for funerals, and could not stop smiling. As they stood together and spoke their vows, Genevieve thought about the strange journey that had brought her here. All the losses and disappointments, the desperate wandering, the risk she had taken in walking into a stranger's house uninvited. If someone had told her 3 months ago that she would be married and happy and home, she would not have believed them. But here she was, with this good man promising to love and cherish her, and she had never been more certain of anything in her life. The wedding night was tender and passionate, both of them nervous but eager to finally come together as husband and wife. Harrison was gentle with her, patient, making sure she felt safe and loved. Genevieve had known the basic facts of what happened between a man and wife. But the reality was different from anything she had imagined, more intimate and overwhelming and wonderful. Afterward, lying in his arms in the big bed they would now share, she felt a peace she had not known since before her parents died. "Are you happy?" Harrison asked, stroking her hair. "Deliriously," Genevieve replied, snuggling closer. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he said honestly. As autumn turned to winter, they settled into married life with the same easy rhythm they had found before. But now there was no restraint, no careful distance. They could touch freely, kiss whenever they wanted, share a bed and their lives fully. The ranch began to thrive under their combined efforts. Genevieve proved to have a head for figures and began managing the books, finding ways to save money and stretch resources that Harrison had not thought of. She also started raising chickens for eggs to sell in town, bringing an additional income. Harrison, his shoulder finally healed, was able to work full days again, and with Genevieve handling the household so efficiently, he found he had more time and energy for the ranch. He was able to hire back one of his former hands, a young man named Charlie who had been working odd jobs since Harrison had let him go. With Charlie's help, they were able to start rebuilding the herd, buying young stock at good prices and improving the grazing lands. But it was not just the practical aspects that flourished. Harrison and Genevieve grew closer every day, learning each other in the way of newlyweds, discovering quirks and habits and preferences. Harrison learned that Genevieve sang while she worked, old folk songs her mother had taught her, and that she had a weakness for licorice candy. Genevieve learned that Harrison was surprisingly well-read despite his rough exterior, that he had a dry sense of humor that could make her laugh until her sides hurt, and that he was remarkably thoughtful, always noticing when she was tired or sad and finding ways to lighten her load. They had their first real fight in January, when Harrison came home with plans to buy more cattle than Genevieve thought they could afford. She tried to explain her concerns about cash flow and reserve funds, but he dismissed her worries, insisting he knew what he was doing. Genevieve, frustrated at not being heard, said something sharp about him being as stubborn as his father had been and apparently just as willing to run the ranch into the ground. It was a low blow, and she regretted it the moment the words left her mouth. Harrison's face went cold and he walked out without another word. Genevieve stood in the kitchen, shaking with anger and regret, not sure whether to follow him or give him space. He did not come in for dinner. As the evening wore on and darkness fell, Genevieve's anger turned to worry. She was about to go looking for him when she heard his boots on the porch. He came inside, his expression tired but no longer angry. "I am sorry," he said before she could speak. "You were right. I was being stubborn and not listening to your concerns. I have been running this ranch alone for so long that I forgot I do not have to anymore. Your opinion matters, Jenny. You are my partner in this, and I need to treat you like one." "I am sorry, too," Genevieve said, crossing to him. "I should not have said what I did about your father. That was cruel and unfair." Harrison pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "We are going to have fights," he said into her hair. "That is part of being married, but we work through them together, all right. No walking away, no holding grudges." "All right," Genevieve agreed. "Together." They made up that night in the best possible way, and in the morning they sat down together with the books and worked out a compromise on the cattle purchase that satisfied both of them. Spring brought new life to the ranch. The cattle they had bought over the winter began calving, increasing the herd size. The chickens laid prolifically, and Genevieve's egg business grew until she was supplying half the households in Gila City. The garden flourished under her care, providing vegetables for their table and enough extra to sell or trade. Slowly, steadily, the ranch was becoming profitable again. It was in late April that Genevieve began to suspect she might be pregnant. She missed her monthly courses, felt queasy in the mornings, and found herself exhausted by midday. She did not say anything to Harrison at first, not wanting to get his hopes up until she was certain. But when another month passed and the signs became unmistakable, she knew she had to tell him. She chose a Sunday evening when they were sitting together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of orange and gold. Harrison had his arm around her shoulders, and she was leaning against him, feeling content and nervous all at once. "Harrison," she said quietly, "I have something to tell you." He looked down at her, concern flickering in his eyes. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am more than all right," Genevieve said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." For a moment Harrison just stared at her, not comprehending. Then understanding dawned and his face transformed with joy. "A baby, truly, truly," Genevieve confirmed, laughing at his expression. "Sometime in November, I think." Harrison let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to town, then picked her up and spun her around despite her protests. "We are having a baby. I am going to be a father." "Put me down, you fool," Genevieve said, but she was laughing too, caught up in his happiness. "You will make me dizzy." He set her down but immediately cupped her face in his hands, kissing her with such tenderness it made her eyes sting. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips. "Thank you for this gift, for everything you have given me." "I think you had something to do with it too," Genevieve teased. The pregnancy progressed well, though Genevieve found the summer heat particularly challenging. Harrison became overprotective, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work, which led to more than one argument about her capabilities. But his concern came from love. And Genevieve tried to be patient with it, accepting help when she needed it, and firmly asserting her independence when she did not. As her belly swelled and the baby's movements became visible, Harrison would spend hours with his hand on her stomach, marveling at the life they had created together. He talked to the baby constantly, telling stories about the ranch, making promises about the future they would build together as a family. In early November, as the weather finally began to cool, Genevieve went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Mrs. Patterson came from town to assist, shooing Harrison out of the room whenever he tried to hover too much. He paced the floor downstairs, worn with worry every time he heard Genevieve cry out. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, he heard a new sound, the wail of a baby. He was up the stairs in seconds, bursting into the bedroom where Genevieve lay exhausted but smiling, a tiny bundle in her arms. "You have a son," she said softly. Harrison approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the impossibly small person in his wife's arms. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and his eyes, when they opened briefly, were blue like his mother's. Harrison felt his throat tighten with emotion. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are amazing, Jenny. I cannot believe you did this." "We did this," Genevieve corrected, reaching up to touch his face. "Do you want to hold him?" Harrison took his son with shaking hands, cradling the tiny weight against his chest. The baby made a small sound and seemed to settle against him, and Harrison felt something in his heart expand until he thought it might burst. This was his son, his and Genevieve's, a whole new life that they had made together. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "I am your father. I promise I will always do my best by you." They named him Henry Thomas Langford, after Harrison's father and Genevieve's father respectively. Henry was a good baby, fussy sometimes as all babies are, but generally content. Harrison proved to be a devoted father, taking his turn walking the floor with a crying infant in the middle of the night, changing diapers without complaint, and spending every free moment playing with his son. Watching him with Henry, Genevieve fell even more deeply in love with her husband. He was so gentle, so patient, so clearly delighted by every small thing the baby did. She had never imagined she could be this happy, this fulfilled. The frightened, desperate woman who had walked into this house uninvited over a year ago seemed like someone from another life. As Henry grew from infant to baby to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Harrison expanded the herd, bought more land, and hired 2 more hands to help with the work. Genevieve's chicken and egg business became so successful that she built a second coop. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, with money in the bank and plans for the future. When Henry was 2 years old, Genevieve discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. In the spring of 1887, she delivered a daughter they named Grace Ellen, a beautiful baby with auburn hair like her mother and a calm temperament that was a stark contrast to Henry's exuberant energy. Harrison was just as smitten with his daughter as he had been with his son, perhaps even more so. He carried her everywhere, let her fall asleep on his chest, and spoiled her terribly whenever Genevieve was not watching. Henry, at 2, was initially suspicious of this new person who was taking up so much of his parents' attention. But he quickly became a protective older brother, always wanting to help with the baby. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier now with 2 young children but no less fulfilling. The ranch was thriving, their family was healthy and happy, and Harrison and Genevieve were more in love than ever. They had built exactly the life they had both hoped for, brick by brick, day by day. One evening in the fall of 1888, after the children were asleep, and they were sitting together on the porch as they had so many times before. Genevieve found herself thinking back to that first day when Harrison had come home to find her mending his shirts. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not broken into your house that day?" she asked. Harrison pulled her closer against his side. "I try not to think about it," he admitted. "The idea of going through life without you, without our children, without all of this is too awful to contemplate. Mrs. Patterson told me last week that she thinks she is a matchmaker now," Genevieve said with a laugh. "Apparently she has been telling everyone in town that she brought us together." "Let her think so," Harrison said easily. "Though the truth is, you brought us together. You were brave enough to take a risk, to walk into a stranger's house and make yourself indispensable." "I was just smart enough to recognize a gift when it was offered." "I was desperate," Genevieve corrected. "But yes, I was brave too, and you were kind enough to give me a chance when you could have thrown me out." "You said something that day that has always stuck with me," Harrison said. "You said I needed help and you needed purpose. It was such a simple equation, but it was exactly right. We needed each other, even before we knew each other, and we still do." Genevieve tilted her face up to kiss him. "Always," she agreed. The years continued to pass in the way that years do, sometimes slowly and sometimes in a rush. Henry grew into a sturdy boy who loved the ranch and followed his father everywhere, learning the business from the ground up. Grace was quieter, more bookish, but she had her mother's practical nature and head for figures. When she was 7, she insisted on helping Genevieve with the accounts and proved remarkably good at it. In 1891, Genevieve gave birth to their third and final child, another boy they named James. By then, the ranch was one of the most successful in the territory, and the Langford name was respected throughout Gila City and beyond. Harrison had been asked to serve on the town council, and Genevieve had become one of the leaders of the Ladies' Aid Society, known for her practical solutions to problems and her willingness to help anyone in need. They had come so far from that day in 1883 when a desperate woman had walked into a lonely man's house uninvited. They had built not just a successful ranch, but a family, a legacy, a life full of love and purpose and meaning. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Harrison surprised Genevieve with a gift. A beautiful rocking chair he had made himself during his rare free moments, carved with intricate designs of desert flowers and their initials intertwined. "For the woman who started everything by sitting in my grandmother's rocking chair, mending my shirts," he said as he presented it to her. Genevieve ran her hands over the smooth wood, her eyes filling with tears. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Not as beautiful as you," Harrison replied, pulling her into his arms. "Not as beautiful as the life we have built together." That night, after the children were asleep and they were lying in bed together, Genevieve thought about purpose and need, about how sometimes the things we need most come to us in the most unexpected ways. She had needed purpose, and Harrison had needed help. But what they had found together was so much more than that simple equation. They had found love, partnership, family, and home. "What are you thinking about?" Harrison asked, feeling her wakeful beside him. "About how grateful I am," Genevieve said simply. "For you, for our children, for this life. For being brave enough that day to take a risk." "I am grateful too," Harrison said, kissing her temple. "Every single day." As Genevieve drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she thought about the girl she had been, lost and alone and desperate. She thought about the moment she had walked into this house and made the decision to stay, to fight for what she needed. It had been the best decision of her life. Outside, the Arizona desert stretched endlessly under a blanket of stars, the same stars that had watched over this land for eons and would continue long after they were gone. But for now, in this moment, in this house, there was warmth and love and a family that had been born from a simple act of courage and need. The ranch would continue to grow and prosper over the years. Henry would eventually take over running it, bringing his own wife and children to live in the house his parents had made a home. Grace would marry a teacher and move to Tucson, where she would open a school for girls. James would become a lawyer, using his sharp mind and his mother's practical nature to build a successful practice in Phoenix. But all of that was still in the future. For now, there was just this: a man and woman who had found each other through need and stayed together through love, building a life that was richer and fuller than either could have imagined alone. There were the sounds of the desert night, the soft breathing of sleeping children down the hall, and the steady beat of two hearts in rhythm. Harrison and Genevieve Langford had built their forever on a foundation of mended shirts and second chances, of courage and kindness, of seeing what was needed and having the bravery to reach for it. And in the end, that was enough. That was everything. The story of how they came together would become family legend, passed down through generations. Great-grandchildren would hear about the day their great-grandmother walked uninvited into their great-grandfather's house and changed both their lives forever. They would hear about need and purpose, about love found in unexpected places, about building something lasting from moments of desperation and hope. But the true story, the one that mattered most, was simpler than all of that. It was the story of two people who needed each other, found each other, and chose each other every single day after. It was a story about coming home, about making a home, about being home for someone else. And years later, when Harrison and Genevieve were old and gray, sitting together on their porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard, they would sometimes look at each other and remember that first day. They would remember the shock and the trust and the risk. They would remember shirts mended with careful stitches, words spoken honestly, hands reaching out in help and hope. "I would do it all again," Genevieve would say. "Every moment, every struggle, every triumph, all of it." "So would I," Harrison would reply, taking her weathered hand in his. Without hesitation, without doubt. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Jenny Langford." And she would smile, that same smile that had lit up her face when he first called her by that nickname all those years ago, and say, "You were the best thing that ever happened to me too." Their love story had started with need and purpose, but it had grown into something that transcended both. It had become the kind of love that weathers storms and celebrates victories, that forgives mistakes and cherishes moments, that builds and sustains and endures. It was the kind of love that makes a life worth living, that turns a house into a home, that creates a legacy worth leaving. And it all began with a woman brave enough to walk through an unlocked door, and a man wise enough to recognize the gift she was offering. It began with mended shirts and honest words, with risk and trust and possibility. It began with two people who needed something and found everything they had been looking for in each other. That was their story, simple and profound, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. And it was enough. It was everything. It was a love that would last all their days and echo through generations, a testament to what can be built when courage meets kindness, when need meets purpose, when two hearts find their way home to each other.